Okay, and it may ask you to continue. I just noticed there was a window that came up and you have a choice to continue or not as long as the meeting is being recorded.
All right, thank you, Val. And good morning, everybody, and welcome to all of you. Yeah, we do have a bit of weather here, and it's great to see all of you. I recognize lots of the faces and a couple of folks who were just meeting today. So, well, we're here this morning to talk about suicide, something that those of us in the mental health community are painfully aware of, oftentimes perhaps through a personal experience and certainly with family members and others. First, thanks to Brian for co-sponsoring this event and hosting us, and to my colleague and friend Val, who put all of this together for us. I think many of you are probably familiar with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. At one time, we were the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and that didn't sound very good, so we changed the name to National Alliance on Mental Illness. Val and myself and Brian are on the board of the Jefferson County affiliate of the NAMI Washington here. There are 13 affiliates here on the peninsula. And NAMI, of course, it focuses on 3 or 4 different things. One, first of all, is education. And we believe very strongly, as I know all of you do, that education is the key to understanding mental illness. And to do that, we offer classes, a family support class that occurs about once a year. And in fact, we just completed that probably about 3 weeks ago, and had a number of people in the class, and we had 2 real life situations going on. So the group collectively were able to be very helpful with the families that were dealing with a crisis during the course of our class. We also offer support groups twice a month. First and second Wednesdays at 7 o'clock. And if you're not on our email list already and you would like to be on our email list to get awareness of to become aware of those, please put your email address in the chat, and we will make sure that you are made aware of our of our classes. We also advocate for funding for mental illness for public policies. We're active with the state legislature. We work very, very closely with NAMI Washington at both the federal level as well as the state level and locally to try to influence public policy to the benefit of people with a mental illness and their families and others. We have a small but very active affiliate here in Jefferson County. We have lots of very, very dedicated people. We're always looking for more. And so I'm going to do a shameless membership call out here. So if you're not a member of NAMI, please join us. You can do it for a nominal amount. And if you'd like us to send you a brochure either via email or in the mail, again, draw our attention to that in the chat, and we'll be very, very happy to do that. And I've been involved with NAMI for a long time, and I have found it extraordinarily important in my life. And the best part of NAMI is all of you. And the people are what make NAMI what it is. And collectively and together, we gather our resources, our energy, and our intelligence, and support one another. And that's what it's really all about. And that's why we're gathered here this morning. And Val, I don't know that there's anything else we want to add to the about us bit.
No, but I do want to mention that there is a point in time when we're going to be asking for your responses to things when we get to the communication part. So if you are not familiar with the chat window, if you move your cursor around, you'll see a whole toolbar down at the bottom, and you'll see that little chat bubble. And once you click on that, you have the choice to put whoever you want in the to line. You can send a chat directly to me, just click on the down arrow, or you can send a chat to everyone in the group. So that is how we'll be using the chat there. And welcome to Caridad. I just saw you pop in there. And Shannon, good to see you again.
Shannon?
Yeah, Shannon Grove. I'm going to, let's see, NAMI is wonderful. Thank you so much, Val and Patrick, for your devotion to educating us. Please send a link to your membership page. I'm in. Okay. We'll maybe, Patrick, can you put the website on there?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay, and so what I'm going to do is use a PowerPoint today to get started with our program. And I know that it'll show up pretty big and you won't be able to see all the pictures of all the people, but you'll see a few. And you may have to move those pictures by clicking your cursor on the black bar on the top of people's videos and move it to the right so that it's out of the way of what you can read. So here we are. This is called Suicide Prevention Intervention, and it's all about knowledge and skills in suicide prevention. So we already know about NAMI because Patrick told us all about it. And the three pillars of NAMI are support, education, and advocacy. And so our goals for this workshop are to provide awareness and education for people around suicide issues and to teach and help you learn some more prevention skills and intervention skills. And so we're going to skip the survey because this class is not long enough for that. So we're going to go right to the definitions. So we want to make sure that we have the definitions correct because sometimes we interchange words. So suicide is death caused by self-directed injurious behavior with an intent to die as a result of the behavior. Suicide attempt is a non-fatal self-directed, same. And suicide ideation is all the thinking about it, the considering or the planning of suicide. So once we know all those definitions, we can move forward. Patrick, with stats.
Hey, thank you, Val. I'm a behavioral scientist, but I've really come to appreciate the value of data. And one thing that's very important about NAMI is that we are science-driven. We're an advocacy organization, but we are also science-driven, which means that information, statistical information and research are very, very important. And to our subject today, let's turn to information about how many suicides take place in the country. And as you can see there, overall national facts. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US, the 10th leading cause of death. And the rate, the way that public health people measure rates is per 100,000. So 13.26 per 100,000. That means that 13 people out of every 100,000 people commit suicide. That is, they take their own lives. And just to give you a perspective, the leading cause of death, of course, in the country is cancer, followed closely by heart disease. Those heart attacks, those may be somewhat interchangeable at this point. But the fact that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States is obviously of great concern to us. And that's followed up by a number that we have from 2018. And the data tends to lag a little bit, but nevertheless, the 2018 information gives us a good indication of how many individuals, and this is really about individuals. The numbers are one thing, but all of us here have something in common, which is that we've been personally or affected by suicide in one way or another. So in 2018, as you can see there, 48,344 Americans died by suicide. And those are not just numbers. Some of us know people who have died by suicide. And the third bullet point there is especially telling, because individuals who do die by suicide there are 25 attempts with other people who are attempting to commit suicide. So and then I think most of us believe that the actual number of suicides that are reported is very, very conservative. It's a number that I think is quite low compared to the number of people that actually commit suicide. Let's go on to the next slide there, Val. I need to put my glasses on to read that. This slide shows the leading causes of death in the state of Washington. And again, these numbers are from 2018, and I'm thinking they'll probably go up a little bit when it comes to 2019 and 2020. And of course, we're well into 2021. We also know that the pandemic, which we're making our way out of, has certainly increased the level of suicide around the country as well as in the state of Washington. Suicide is the 8th leading cause of death in Washington, as you can readily see there. And of importance also is the age breakdown there. You can see that suicide is a leading cause of death for individuals between the ages of 15 and 34. And there have been a number of suicides here in Jefferson County and elsewhere in the state of Washington of young people taking their own lives, which is of great concern. It's the 4th leading cause of individuals between the ages of 35 and 44, the 5th leading cause of death for people between the ages of 45 and 54, and then you can readily see the 8th leading cause of death for people 55 to 64, and then when you get to my age, 65 and older, it's the 16th leading cause of death. I want to hasten to add too, though, one of the higher statistics, and if this were adjusted for gender, the 16th leading cause of death, we would find that for white males, it's in that age group, it tends to be somewhat higher. And we'll hear from James later on about people who take their own lives, and perhaps James will be able to talk a little bit about how that goes in communities of color. And let's see. And so in Washington, that is really small print. In the state of Washington, the number of deaths, and again, this is very important to look beyond the numbers, that in excess of 1,100 people in the state of Washington in 2018 took their own lives. And that means that the suicide rate in Washington is 14.83, and that leaves us 26th, right about in the middle of the number of state, right in the middle of the states where, insofar as the number of people taking their own lives is concerned. I might just mention that I come from the state of Montana, which has the highest suicide rate in the nation, and the NAMI people there are working very, very high on it. The numbers are for the national. Nationally are just repeated there, and so we're very close to the national average. And I don't think there's anything else on that slide. Is there, Val?
Okay, I'm gonna stop share for a minute because I think somebody was trying to come in. No, they weren't. Okay. I heard that bing and I thought, oh, somebody's trying to get in. One thing I wanted to point out before we go any further is that you'll notice that all these statistics are for 2018. And that's because there's a lag in the statistics, mainly because some suicides are not actually certified as suicides until maybe a year or a year and a half after the fact. So all the statistics we get are at least a year and a half old. We're just now starting to get to the 2019 statistics in. And so we're still using 2018 because 2019 is not complete yet. Sometimes a death will be ruled as accidental, and later on with further education or further investigation, they find that it is in fact a suicide. So that's why there is a lag in those statistics.
Oh, thank you, Val. And we have some more numbers for you. These are local versus state and national. In Jefferson County in 2017, there were 11 suicides and then 14 in 2018. So keep in mind what Val said about the lagging data. Now, that means Jefferson County has a relatively small population too, as does Qualam County, our neighbors to the west. But so our suicide rate in Jefferson County is 42 per 100,000, and that's nearly 3 times as high as the state rate and the national rate. And a number of individuals within that 14 are young people. There was a suicide at Blue Heron Middle School, for example, here last year, and so every suicide is a tragedy, and no more so than with respect when it comes to young people. We've already talked a little bit. Go back just a moment, Val, if you will, please. Back to that other slide, and we'll finish that. We've already talked about the national numbers and a little bit of disagreement there. of great concern also to are the number of suicides among veterans. If I remember correctly, there is a multiple suicides every day among veterans who are a particularly vulnerable population. And of the number of people in the state of Washington, and I think I'm reading this correctly, Val, the number of people in the state of Washington that have taken their own lives, 288 of those in 2014 were military. Oh, and there's the number I was looking for, back up to veterans there. 20 veterans per day around the country are taking their own lives. I know that the Veterans Administration is working very hard to help people with a mental illness, veterans with a mental illness, but there is much, much more to be done. And then we can go on to suicide rates by age. I'll not go through the detail of that. You can
Okay,
really
that one's mine. I'll take that.
go ahead. Then you can talk about it. Great. Go ahead, Val. Thank you.
Okay, so the age facts are very interesting because we can see which age population is at the most risk. And you can see there that the highest number is that light purple one. And that is with the little triangle on it, 85 and older is way up at the top. So that's interesting to see. A steady rate of 15 to 24. And probably another stunning figure is the 75 to 84 number. And someone asked me when we did this before if they count assisted suicide, and I don't know the answer to that question. But these are the age facts, at least since 2016. This is an interesting fact also because it compares homicide to suicide. And you can see that while the homicide rates had gone down up till 2017, the suicide rates had gone up. Since the pandemic, I have a sneaking suspicion that the homicide rate is going to change. And so that may be a little different when we update it in the next couple of months. These are also figures that we don't get until almost 2 years later after the fact. This one has to do with race and ethnicity, but you can see that the highest rate of suicide is still white, and the second highest rate is American Indian, Native Americans. So that is something to really be concerned about as well. This talks about the method of suicide. And as you can see, that firearms is the most frequently used method of suicide, followed by suffocation, which hanging falls into that category. And when they talk about poisoning, they're talking about overdosing on any kind of drugs, purposely overdosing, and that's what the poisoning is. So we've got these different categories, and we can see where things are the most lethal with the firearms. And we'll be talking about firearms later on as well. Okay, Patrick, warning signs.
Yeah, thank you, Val. And this obviously is very important. So suicide warning signs begin with what a people is saying with talk, changes in their behavior, reflections on their mood. Those are all very, very important things to pay attention to. And we have some details about those that Val's going to put up on the screen. So listen for these. If a person talks about, for example, being a burden to others, that they feel like they're causing others difficulty and that they become a burden on them. When a person talks about feeling trapped, that there's no way out, that they've reached a point in their lives where they feel inert, or they simply can't go forward, they simply can't go backward. And all of us know about emotional pain, and people who are contemplating suicide will talk about this unbearable pain that they're experiencing. And of course, not everyone who is contemplating suicide is going to be verbal about it, but these are key things to listen for. one of the things that may seem obvious, but it's important that we talk about it, which is having no reason to live. That the person has lost hope. They don't see any purpose in getting up in the morning and going on. And then some people talk explicitly about killing themselves. So pay attention to what people are saying. And then, of course, mood is something that all of us who are affiliated with NAMI have a very, very close relationship. We monitor our moods and those and the others. One of the leading causes of suicide, of course, is depression. And we're not talking about the blues. In NAMI, we make it very clear that we're talking about clinical depression, deep episodes of depression. Along with depression comes a loss of interest. I talk with people who don't have any sense of depression, and it's difficult to explain depression to them, but I sometimes say it's like trying to walk through water. And then in keeping with that, of course, is a loss of interest, and then anger, outright anger, just rage. People are very, very angry, and something that's always present with respect to our moods is irritability. People become angry, they lose interest, depression, and then they also are sometimes very, very irritable. And I think we have one more to come up there, which has to do with behavior. And Val, this is really, really neat the way that you've done that. So the third indicator to look for is a person's behavior. And it's important that all of us are keen observers of one another's behavior and of our family members who have a mental illness. Increased use of alcohol or drugs, which is very common. Another term for that is a co-occurring disorder. We know that many people with a mental illness also use alcohol and drugs to excess. And then people looking for a way to kill themselves, going online and searching for information about how to take your own life. And then acting recklessly, driving erratically, for example, taking risks that they would not only take. We live very near the bluff here on the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And when we're walking on the beach, which we frequently do, I look up on that bluff and I sometimes think to myself, boy, is somebody coming there to kind of scope the place out and they're going to jump over? And actually what happened is a couple of people, as my friends here in Port Townsend know, have done that over the years. And because I'm involved with NAMI, that's sort of a morose thought, but I do think about that when we're walking along the beach and looking up at the people standing there. Withdrawing from activities. Those of us who have experienced depression know that we tend to become isolated. And not only do we withdraw from activities, we also take ourselves away from our families and friends. My twin brother committed suicide about 20 years ago. And he became increasingly isolated. I would go to see him, and it was really hard to get him to spend any time with me because he would go off because he just wanted to be alone. Sleep, a lot of us have trouble sleeping anyway, but when a person is contemplating suicide or suicidal, is they'll sleep too much or frequently too little. And we know that sleep deprivation is a contributor to mental illness. And then some people are quite methodical about this. They'll talk to their friends, talk to family members, talk to other significant people in their lives, and go through the process of saying goodbye. So if you encounter someone with a mental illness who says goodbye and they're not going to Paris, then you should pay attention. And then people also give away sometimes, and not every person that's contemplating suicide is going to do all of these things, but they may do something. And people who are anticipating or thinking about or contemplating suicide will begin to sometimes begin to give away things that are important to them, as it says, their prized possessions. And they also become more aggressive. And this is in keeping with rage and irritability. Carrying thoughts of suicide, as many of us know, is not an easy thing. It's a heavy, heavy burden, and it naturally would make us feel angry and make us feel more aggressive. So there you have a list of things that people may say, changes in their moods and their behaviors. And these are all important things they're all important to pay attention to, but these are not the only things, and there are some others. Akathisia and the risk of suicide. Akathisia is a reaction to a change in medication or the taking of medication. And it's always struck me as rather ironic that when we use when we take medications to help us stabilize, those of us who have a mental illness, that those medications can sometimes make us suicidal. And so it's important to understand what the definitions and causes are of akathisia, which again is a reaction to medication. And there are symptoms and reactions that come with that in the relationship to suicide. Remember, those of you who watch late night TV and they'll talk about it, and this is all directed at people my age, by the way, they want us to buy drugs. And they'll say, here's and I'm rather astonished sometimes at the number of medications that are being advertised to treat depression, but they'll always talk very, very quickly about the fact that that particular medication can cause suicidal ideation. So that's important to pay attention to. And in NAMI, we often talk about that in terms of a double-edged sword. The medication helps, but in some circumstances, it can also cause one to engage in suicidal ideation, which is really kind of ironic. And then obviously the importance of medical care and psychiatric care is we can't emphasize that enough. It's incredibly important that people seek care from a professional, which again is extraordinarily difficult where we live because there's such a lack of healthcare providers that who are skilled and know how to treat mental illness. Val, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to that or not.
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it pretty
Okay.
well, but I just wanted to say welcome. I've checked about 3 or 4 people in here, and I can't see all your pictures because I'm doing this screen share, but welcome, and we're glad that you're here.
Yeah.
And so now I'm going to talk about the basics of a suicidal person. These are kind of general things that we need to all understand, and that is that most suicides are preventable. And, there is always that looking in the rear view mirror where you think, gosh, if we only would have, could have, should have. And what we want to do is make sure people have more skills, more understanding so that they can be part of the prevention. The fact is also that suicide can seem to represent a very logical solution to the people who are contemplating suicide because it can end in their mind the unbearable pain that they're feeling. And this is truly pain just as much as if you broke a bone or had some kind of a cut. It is indeed pain. Emotional pain is real pain. The other fact is that there is no type of suicidal person. Sometimes we look back and ask ourselves, gee, what did we not see here? Because this person appeared to be happy, they appeared to be busy and involved, and yet they took their own lives. So you can't stereotype a suicidal person and say, well, they all look depressed, because that's not necessarily true. And finally, the information from today's training can and should be applied to anyone you know, because it's not just the people who look depressed, it is anyone that you know. So we have to be on the alert for all of that. There are a lot of common myths about suicide, but these are the most common, and we're here to debunk them. Suicide only affects individuals with a mental health condition. Well, that isn't true. A person who takes their own life could do it because of the immediacy of some event or circumstance in their life. It's not that they originally or for chronically for a period of time had a mental health condition. That is a myth. It is also a myth that once an individual is suicidal, he or she will always remain suicidal. And I'm hoping James can talk to us about that today, because being suicidal it's like being sad about something. You don't remain that way for the rest of your life, sometimes not even the rest of the day. It is also a myth that most suicides happen suddenly without warning. And we know that people who are contemplating suicide sometimes for a long period of time plan it, think about it, and think about ways to do it so that it's not just something that happens suddenly. It may be sudden to us as outsiders, but not to them.
Mhm.
It's also a myth that people who die by suicide are selfish and take the easy way out. And as we talked about before, people who may die by suicide are looking for a way to stop the unbearable pain. And it's not about being selfish, it's about not being able to bear the pain anymore. So it's also a myth that talking about suicide will lead to and encourage suicide. And I have to really stop here and tell you a story. I worked in the schools for a long time. I worked in a very large school district that had 33 school buildings. And one of the things that I did was to handle the health curriculum. And we had a number of suicides in the district one year. And I brought some specialists in to talk with students at the high schools where they happened. And there were parents who believed that talking about it could actually encourage their kids to take their own lives. And that is a myth. I think talking about it, and this is the point we were trying to get across, talking about it brings it out in the open and allows you to share and listen and empathize with people who are affected by suicide ideation or affected by a suicide of friends or someone they know. And the talking is one of the ways that we can deal with and prevent suicide. And maybe James can talk about that a little bit today. So the question is, how do I talk with someone about suicide? And so in order to answer that question, we're going to follow the acronym, if you will, that the University of Washington came up with in their School of Social Work. It's called the LEARN acronym. And it stands for look for warning signs, empathize and listen, ask about suicide, remove the danger, and what are the next steps. And so Patrick is going to take us through the first part of this.
Thank you, Val. I need to put out a disclaimer here. I grew up in this little town in northern Montana, but as you are aware, all of you are aware, I tend to talk fairly fast. And one time a guy asked me if I was from New York, and I barely knew where New York was. And so so over the years, as I've met people from New York, I'm thinking to myself, do I talk as fast as they do? And so it's always a real pleasure to listen to Val because she's always pretty measured and thoughtful about how she goes about this. And then I tend to kind of get really excited about it. But back to
That's why we make a good team, Patrick.
There you go. I'm going to make my screen a little bit larger here, Val. So remember, we're talking about the acronym LEARN, and I really like acronyms. And so when we talked about looking for the first thing, of course, is the letter L. And that leads us again to talk a little bit about some of the warning signs. Look for these warning signs, and these are very important. So I'm going to very briefly repeat them. Depression and anxiety. I have yet to meet a person who is depressed who is also not anxious. And that's true with folks who have schizophrenia, bipolar, or any number of the other 500 and some mental illnesses that are listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Anger and irritability. I mentioned my brother Mike, he was incredibly irritable and not angry. Hopelessness. And we actually never talked specifically about that in no small part because we were never together long enough to have that conversation, even if he would have said something. But that notion of hopelessness, and people ask me, why do you think your brother killed himself? Well, my response sometimes is, well, he just lost hope. and that there's nothing that he can do with, he felt, in my opinion, that there was nothing that he could do. He'd lost his job and so on. And that leads to the idea of shame. And of course, working is very important to us. And when one loses their job and they can't get another one, that leads to shame, and we're often humiliated as well. If we've not, and all of you are very empathetic people, so I think that just about everybody here understands that. But for a person who's contemplating taking their own life, these are extremely acute within their lives. And then again, just to repeat the bit about situations, the loss of relationships, self-respect, status. Boy, losing your status in the community. It could be a job loss, or sometimes with the death of a spouse. Many people present themselves as a couple, and when when part of the other part of your relationship, when that person dies, that can really affect your status. And that gets to the second point there, the death of a family member or a friend. And especially by suicide, many of us have relatives who have taken their own lives. That doesn't mean that suicide in of itself is genetic. We do know that mental illness has a genetic component to it, so that's important to pay attention. And then a sudden, unexplainable joy after a period of depression. And I may need some help with that. And that may be when a person has made that decision to take their own life, and they're ironically finding some relief in that. Do I have that right, Val? I've often
Yeah, that is very common. That once people have made the decision to take their own lives, they sometimes are at a moment of peace because they are at peace with it.
I know one guy who he was a therapist at a small liberal arts college that I went to, and this is not that long ago. I'm thinking, gosh, 7 years ago. Well accomplished, a veteran of the military, just this extraordinary guy. And he willingly shared his struggles with mental illness. And then one morning, he brought coffee to his wife before she got up, and this is what our friend said about her husband, is he brought coffee to her in the morning. They talked a little bit, and then he left, and he'd made arrangements to get a gun, and he drove up into the mountains, and he shot himself. And I remember talking to her name was Teresa, or is it Teresa? And I remember talking to her about that. And I said, did you have any indication? She said, our morning was the same. It was an intimate moment for us. And then a few hours later, he was dead. And again, behaviors, the increased use of drug and alcohol, isolation, saying or writing like they feel like a burden. Many people, I don't tend to do this, but many people will keep a journal, or they'll send a letter. And conversely, many people that do take their own lives don't send a letter. They don't leave a note of any kind. My brother Mike did not leave a note. Giving away prized possessions, we've talked about 2 or 3 times, and then losing interest in activities that they were previously interested in. And that is a particularly acute indication sometimes of people who are intent upon committing suicide. Sportsmen may not go fishing. Individuals who are skilled in the arts may stop painting. One thing we do know is that many artists, Van Gogh is my favorite example, if you will, of a guy who had a mental illness. He didn't go on to take his own life, but many people with a mental illness are particularly skilled in the arts and other areas of our lives. And then statements like the world will be better off without me. I've heard people say that. Or you'll miss me when I'm gone. Oh, of course we're going to miss them. It's a very painful experience for all of us. And then let's turn to the letter E, which is...
Well, here's an example of where people might write besides their journal.
Yeah, I got ahead of myself. And this is something that I hadn't really thought about it. I think it's partly my age and partly my fear of technology, is sometimes you don't want to wake up. And this is something, for example, that a person might post on Facebook. I tend not to do a lot of Facebook. I pester my wife sometimes for information that about family members that she comes across on Facebook. But I don't participate in Indoor, and I very on Nextdoor. Some of you are familiar with that platform, and I don't pay attention to Facebook. But when Val and I were talking about this, I was reminded that yes, people sometimes will be very verbal or will write things and say things. And so it's important that we pay attention to all mediums. And then when we do find something, act on it. Act on it. Call them, call 911, do whatever you think you need to do so that we can save that person's life. And I think there's one more example, Val, if I remember.
Well, there is a way. See where it says in the box, this is where you click to report posts you're worried about. Facebook actually has a way for people to respond and hopefully send out an alert, get some help. I don't know exactly what happens when you click on it, but that's what they say. So there is a way to respond to that. The next thing
let
that
me
we're
just come
going to
back for just a moment, Val.
go ahead.
Unfortunately, and I think the science is still contemplating this, but we know that Facebook can be an incredible, cruel medium. And I believe that some people are driven to suicide by the things that are posted by unthinking people, and some people who are just deliberately cruel that can drive a person to suicide. Okay, Val.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the E part of it, empathize and listen. And listening is the key. I mean, you can't respond. You can't make it really clear to the other person that you really care and that you understand unless you spend some time listening. Even if what they are saying is hard to hear, continue listening and avoid judgment, like things like, you shouldn't feel that way. That's a judgment. And I know it's hard, but you have to maintain your own calm. And then reflect back only on the things they have told you, not on something that's happened to you or something that you've seen happen to someone else, but reflect back to them only what they're telling you. And that tells them that you are in fact listening, that you do in fact care. So here are some helpful responses. Tell me more about that. Or you must be really hurting. I hear that you're in a lot of pain. And then other kinds of responses. I love you no matter what. And it's okay to tell me about what you're going through. Because sometimes they're afraid to let you know because they're afraid of the reaction. And finally, I'm worried about you and I want to help. Let them know that you do want to help. Empathizing can be hard, but these are the things what not to say. That is interpreting the situation from your own perspective. You need to try to interpret the situation from their perspective and try not to panic, judge, or get angry. And this is the one that we are most frequently tempted to do, and that is to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. Frequently, people will say, well, let's go have something to eat, you know, and that doesn't necessarily fix the problem. And also asking why questions, because sometimes people just don't know why. And then being in denial. Here's this: my son or daughter would not think about suicide. You have to just put that aside and do the listening. Examples of what not to say: let me get you something to eat, that'll make you feel better. No, it probably won't. Or it will all be okay. How do you know it will all be okay? And she wasn't right for you anyway. So that's making a judgment. And then why do you feel this way? Well, a lot of times they just don't know why they feel that way. So now we're going to look at the asking about suicide. And this is the most important part. This is the part people have the most trouble with. Patrick?
Yes, thank you, Val. And I'll begin by saying that no one wants to feel bad. Nobody wants to have a mental illness. We don't go out and go shopping and say, where can I buy a mental illness? It's those of us who are involved with mental illness, and either through friends or family or have our own diagnosis, know that I would be happy to give mine away to well, who would I give it to? That's a terrible thing to say. So ask about suicide, and ask in a way that invites an honest response. Avoid phrases like, you're not thinking about suicide, are you? Use the word suicide openly. There is a connotation that goes with it in our society, but nevertheless, it's important that we actually use that word. And the sentence that I use, and others may use as well, is, are you thinking about killing yourself? It's ask them right out front, are you thinking about killing yourself? Or are you thinking about doing harm to yourself? Are you feeling like you will harm yourself? And don't use acronym, or excuse me, don't use words like stupid, or are you thinking about not being here? Those vague go around kinds of phrases do not help the situation. And then having asked that person, are you thinking about killing yourself, or are you thinking about doing harm to yourself? They may well say yes. They may absolutely say yes. So brace yourself for that, and try not to be surprised. I've never been successful at not being surprised, but try to take that in stride, and do prepare yourself to hear a yes when you ask a person if they're thinking about killing themselves, or if they are. And I like the word harm, if you're thinking about harming yourself as well.
So I'm going to stop the screen share right now, because I'd really like to reintroduce James Donaldson, who has joined us today. And for those of you who came late, James Donaldson is a former NBA basketball player. He played for the Sonics, and he has agreed to talk about his life situation, and also about some of the work that he's doing. So James, we are so happy to see you.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and what a great presentation so far. I would love a copy of your PowerPoint slides, because I've seen a lot of them over the last couple of years, but this is today's one of the best ones I've seen in a long time. So
well, thank you. Thank you.
You can send me a copy. I'd really much appreciate it. But anyway, yeah, I'm not sure who our listening and viewing audience is out there, but I just want to come on and share my experience of what I've gone through, and my story of how I made it through mental health challenges and issues, and the whole gamut: depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation. I went through the whole gamut only in 2018, only 2.5 years ago. It seems like years and years ago now, but just listening to your presentation, gets those emotions stirred up again. So, but I'm glad that happens, because it reminds me of how real it was, and how close to ending this life I came. So when I look at what we're talking about today, I break it down into 3 different categories, and we went through the statistics. Those who actually commit suicide, of obviously I didn't. Those who attempted suicide, which I didn't also, and those who thought about it with the suicidal ideations, is where I was with the plans and everything all mapped out. It was just not only a matter of if, it was almost a matter of when, if I didn't get help, and get help quickly. So I've been, since 2018, those 12 months of pure darkness and hell were the most agonizing 12 months of my life. And, when you're in the midst of that, there's such a sense of despair and despondency and hopelessness that you just can't see. You can't see the next day. And a lot of times you can't even see the next hour. how you're going to get through the afternoon. I remember when I went to see my doctor, and you guys touched on it a little bit, my family doctor, who luckily for me was a very compassionate, very intuitive, inquisitive doctor. And he took quite a bit of extra time out of his busy schedule to sit and talk with me for 15, 20, 30 minutes more than my appointment allowed. And after going through my whole story with him of what I was dealing with, and this was probably at the very lowest point of my darkness and despair. I mean, if I didn't see him that morning, I'm sure I would have went home and ended my life that night. That's how close I was. And he's 4 feet away from me, sitting in the office. And he's saying, James, if you take your life, people are going to miss you. People care about you. People love you. And I looked right back at him, as sincere as I can be, and said, Doc, nobody cares about me. Nobody's going to miss me. Nobody loves me. And I was as sure as I can absolutely be. That's exactly how I felt at that moment. And I tell people that unless you've gone through these trials and challenges of mental health issues, you really have no idea. I mean, you can read all the books and have all the theories and all the letters behind your name that you want, but unless you've really gone through it yourself. And up until that point, I had absolutely no idea. I was always a very compassionate guy, very empathetic, very sympathetic kind of guy. So I understood, I felt I understood, could put myself in anybody's shoes. But these were a different pair of shoes that I've never imagined what they would be about in real life terms. And so, you know, my doctor sensed that I was really at that point of doing some harm to myself. And immediately, before I even left the building, he had a behavioral health counselor come in and sit and talk with me for an hour. And that was good because it gave me somebody to just really let everything out even more so. He put me on prescription medications, antidepressant, anti-anxiety medications, of which I wasn't a big proponent of, but you know, this was prescribed and it was recommended by him. So I went ahead and took the medication for 6 months or so. I never really felt any dramatic effect from them, but apparently they're doing what they're supposed to do, working on the brain chemistry and those kind of things, and good. So I went ahead and followed through with the protocol. And then I myself reached out a few days later to a small, intimate group of friends of mine, 6 or 7, 8 people who had known me for the last 30, 40 years. And I told them all, I said, hey guys, I'm really, really struggling and I don't want to be here no more. Now, they knew me when I was riding high, when everything was going great in my life. Seattle Supersonic, NBA player, fortune, fame, all those great things. And now they saw me at the depths and at the very bottom of where life can take you and still be here. And they were shocked. And I told them, I said, hey, I'm not sleeping through the night. I wake up every night, 2 or 3 in the morning, can't get back to sleep. Can I call you if I need to? To a person, they put their hand, put us on speed dial, call me at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. It doesn't matter. And I said, great. And I took them up on that several occasions. And I told them also, I said, hey, I need somebody to call me and check in on me 2 or 3 days a week. Just call and see how my day's going. What's bothering me today? What's heavy on my mind? What's my thoughts? And they all took me up on that and called and checked on me periodically throughout the week for the next months to help me get through this. And those were really the strategies and the remedies I used to work myself out of this. It was a long, slow crawl. I mean, of 12 months of trying to work my way through all this darkness. One thing that really was a catalyst and shocked me into making sure that I made it through and stay here was the suicide by a young quarterback from my alma mater, Washington State University, Tyler Helinski, in January 2018. On the campus of Washington State University, he took a gun and killed himself in his apartment on campus. And that just shook me to no end. I don't know why. I don't know Tyler personally, but the fact that it was at my alma mater, the newspaper reports were talking about this great kid, Tyler, and they were talking about all these buildings around Pullman, Washington, of where I'd been, and I knew very well. And everybody's talking about how great a kid Tyler was, and they didn't see this coming, and how could this happen? And I told myself, I'm bound and determined to make my way through this thing and to be here to tell my story. I didn't want to take my life and have everybody else try to tell my story. And so that began my long, slow process of 12 months of working my way out of this thing, finally, and eventually. It was probably 10 months into the 12 months that any kind of lightness started to appear through the darkness of saying, wow, I think I'm getting better. I think there is hope for tomorrow. That's when I started thinking about putting together my nonprofit foundation that works with mental health awareness and suicide prevention, of which I've become a voice and an advocate for in a big, big way. Your Gift of Life Foundation is my nonprofit. Also, I started thinking, wow, I've got a story to tell. I've got a platform I can speak from as a former professional athlete, as a longtime Seattle person, as a business person, as a WSU grad, as an African-American man who can speak to our communities of color and let us know that, hey, we can make our way through these kind of things. These mental health stigmas have been a big, big taboo subject in communities of color for generations. We just don't talk about it. Black communities, brown communities, Native American, Asian, we just don't talk about it. We won't talk about it. It's cultural, most of it. And, I think a lot of these communities are really, male dominated and masculine and macho, and the guys talk about these things. So with our Black and brown communities especially, we're very religious. We believe God is going to take care of us and is going to see us through. And so we give everything up to God and just say, hey, God's going to see me through no matter how terrible I feel or how close to taking my life I'm coming. God's going to see me through. Well, I'm a religious Christian guy, and God does see us through, but he also gives us the ability to think and to make wise decisions and to reach out for help. And we've got to utilize that. There's a saying in our church, sometimes we're so heavenly bound, we're no earthly good. So we got to live this life while we're here on earth at the best that we can live it and to make the best decisions for ourselves. And so those stigmas and those taboos are things that I'm working against in our communities of color, to remind us that, it's okay not to be okay. To remind the guys that, hey, I know you want to be tough. I know you want to be macho. I know you want to be the strong, silent type. But there comes a point where you just have to reach out for help and let people know that you need help. Men in particular, us guys, we are, a lot of us are socially isolated anyway in our own little way. We don't have a lot of friends typically. We don't do a lot of things other than talk real surfacey on the surface about conversations, sports, cars, girls, money, whatever. Nothing really substantial to talk about and get to know each other. And so a lot of us find ourselves being alone when we have trouble, afraid to talk about what's bothering us, afraid to reach out for a fear of not being man enough or tough enough. A lot of it comes from the way we're raised, I mean, little boys just don't cry. We're taught we don't cry. We're taught to toughen it up, to fall down and scrape your knee and just wipe your knee off. And even though you have a rip in your jeans, keep on going. Don't let it bother you. And especially when we become competitive athletes or in the military. These structured institutions of you've got to play with pain. You've got to excel at all costs. You've got to push yourself. You can't take time off for injuries or for a bad day. Those things can be detrimental as well if you don't have a good balance with it. And so these are the things I work with through my foundation. I've got a daily blog that goes out every single day as a article, usually repurposed from an article on the internet about mental health awareness, whether it's in the suicide attempts in the education field, the medical field, political, entertainment, arts, all kind of things. Kids, especially the LGBTQ community. Every article is different every single day because I want to cover the whole gamut of everyone who can be suffering from this mental health issue at any time. Now, my life, up until the point that everything totally went upside down, was, I call it a charmed life. I mean, everything was great. I was, 57 years old, and I had a massive emergency open heart surgery. And that really began my downward spiral with 4 major surgeries in 5 years. And so my thing was a whole series of life events. I've always lived a very healthy life. I've never drank. I've never smoked. I've never done drugs. I've always lived a real clean and straight life and healthy as can be. But as life sometimes throws you a curveball, you have to hang in there and try to hit that thing. And so after those 4 major surgeries and during those 4 major surgeries over 5 or 6 years, my mother passed away. My wife just got up and walked out on her marriage and took her son with her, my stepson. My home that I lived in for 40 years went into foreclosure. I could no longer run my business the way I used to for 28 years. And I wasn't behind the wheel driving and guiding my business through all of this because I couldn't. Physically, I was just flat on my back for a couple of those years, relying on managers and everybody else to keep my business going for me. I ended up losing my business. I ended up going into bankruptcy, losing my home through foreclosure, near eviction. So all of these things that could go wrong went wrong. And I feel like these kind of things can happen to anybody. Life just has a way of throwing these things at you. And sure, we can handle 1 or 2 things if it's spaced out over several months or a year. We all expect a parent to pass on before we do. But none of us expect a child to pass on before we do. None of us expect to go into bankruptcy or to lose our homes and things, but those things happen. But usually we can handle those things if it's just 1 or 2 things a year and not 6 or 7 things in a year or 2. And so that's kind of where I had to work my way back from. I'm back to good standing again. I'm back to better health. I'm never going to be an athlete like I used to be due to the heart surgeries and all the kind of things I had to go through. Mentally, I feel as strong and as solid and back together as ever. even though at times you see me still getting emotional when I recall what I went through. But as I mentioned, that's a good thing. It just shows me that I really made it through. And it wasn't a dream. It wasn't just something I imagined. I was able, after all those months, to set up my nonprofit and also publish a book back in January detailing my whole experience and giving a lot of helpful hints and strategies to help other people make it through these difficult, dark times. So I just really wanted to come on board today and share those things with you and to open it up to any questions you might have and talk about some of the things that we're talking about this morning. So I'll pass it back to you at this point, Val, and you can take it from here. So thank you so much, though.
Well, thank you so much for being here, James, and telling your story. And it's so important for people to hear from other people who have been there. And you so eloquently tell that story. I really appreciate your doing that. Before we leave, though, I want to make sure that you can get to that chat button and put in maybe your website so people can contact you if they want, or email, I don't know which, so that if they have any further questions, they can continue to have a dialogue with you. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Is there anyone that has questions for James?
James, Patrick here. Thank you. Oh gosh, I'm you give us guys, you make it okay to cry and to share our emotions. You described me perfectly, and gosh, I thank you, boy.
You're welcome. Thank you. Well, you know, we all need to stick together, and it's just the toughest thing for guys to do, especially. So many of us get into all these self-destructive behaviors, you know, gambling or drinking and drugs or promiscuous behaviors, all kind of reckless things that we start doing because we don't care, and we don't have anybody around us to keep us accountable or to talk to about these things. So we're bound to go and do those kind of things, which only adds to the misery and to the suffering that we're going through.
So you probably noticed that he's put up his website there, yourgiftoflife.org. So those of you who are interested in getting more information and can go there. And there's some really nice comments here. I hope you're able to see those, James. Anybody else have a comment or a question before we go on? Because we really haven't finished going through our acronym yet.
I do see one there, Val, and James, this is to you. You as an athlete worked very, very hard to perfect your profession, perhaps in the sense of being a perfectionist. And the question is, did that contribute to your distress, and were you too hard on yourself?
Wow, I think so in a way. You know, I never was angry at anybody else. I was angry at myself for having to go through what I went through. And, but I was never to a point of taking it out on anybody else. I tell you, my means of ending my life were one by hanging from my rafters in my garage. I had a big coil of rope up there for 30 or 40 years since I had the house, and it just kept looking at me every time I drove into the garage. And the other was a long plastic tube from my exhaust pipe into the window of my car while I sat in there. And the third was suicide by cop, as a overly larger than life guy, African-American man, going up and wrestling with a cop. Surely he would shoot me dead. And I knew that. especially with all the national stories we hear of, Black men being shot by a police officer. I didn't want to put our society through all of that, trying to figure out, wow, James got shot by a police officer. How did that happen? Why did that happen? It must have been a racial thing. No. Sometimes I think some of these shootings that happen to our Black men by cops are suicide by cop. You touched on that. We don't really know sometimes what's going on in the mind of people. We talked also, is suicide always an option once you go through these kind of things? My mental health therapist friend who helped me get through this was one of those 2 o'clock in the morning guys I used to call. He said, yes, suicide's always going to be an option, but for a normally, healthily, mentally balanced person, it's way, way down the list. You'll never get to it in your normal everyday life. It might be option number 100. But for somebody who's been through things or going through things, it raises up into the top 10. And while you're going through things, it might be in the top 3 or 4 or 5 of an option. But after you made your way through it, and this is pertaining to me, it's probably still in my top 25. It's an option, but it's going to take a long, long way for me to ever reach that point. A normally healthy person, it's option 100. For me, it might be option 25. I've got a lot of other options I could look at and make sure I get back on track of. So I think suicide is always an option. I haven't had a bad day since 2018, actually 2019 when I came out of all of that. So I think I'm back on track. I feel like I'm totally back together again. And that's the good thing. The emotions still come, the tears still flow, but that's a good thing. I'm here to tell my story. And unlike Tyler Helinski, and his family is a wonderful family. I met them, I talked to them. I told them that Tyler was really the catalyst for getting me through. They are still wondering what in the world happened. How could that happen to their boy? And so I'm still here to tell my story. And I'm so, so glad I am.
Yes.
And we're so glad you are too. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. I don't know if you understand how impactful it is for people around you, but you have a way of telling your story straightforward, and it's very real and very heartfelt to all of us. So thank you so much for being here.
You're wonderful. And I'd love to be part of your ongoing programs and opportunities to speak about these kind of things. I don't know what the audience has been through or what they're going through, but like I mentioned, unless you've actually gone through it, there's nothing like the real thing, they say. And so I'm more than happy to share the story anytime, anywhere.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we actually have a few more slides here to look at, but this seemed to be the best place for James to speak. And James, I will send you this PowerPoint when we get through, and we'll talk.
Great. I'm going to stay on board and watch the rest of your slides. I love the presentation so far. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay, thanks.
So we left off at asking about the suicide. And so the question is, when and how often do I ask? So Patrick, this is your part.
Yeah. Boy, James, you said it all, and I think that we'll add to that. You're right. One thing about NAMI is we are our stories. Our stories are the most powerful things that we can share with our friends and our family members and others, and also with legislators and people who are involved in public policy. Our stories are our most important way of talking about mental illness. To build on some things and to build on what James said and shared with us, and also what we've already talked about, when and how often do I ask? When you notice multiple warning signs coming together, or when there's a noticeable change in that person's particular behavior, and when you become concerned about changes in behavior, we always tell family members, if you're in touch with your family, that you're often the best observer of what's going on with your family member. But that's not always the case, because as we've talked about this morning, we do become isolated. But if you do see changes in behavior, ask that person, and then trust your gut. Trust your instincts. You'll know when something's has gone amiss with that person. We always encourage people to take your observations in hand. Ask yourself what's going on, and then ask that person. And Val's highlighted this in blue, and we've come back to this many times. And I'm thinking so much about what James said in reaching out. You reach into that person by asking about suicide, and you open up that pathway where as James said, you can say, I need you to call me. I need to be able to call you. And if you're undecided, you're indecisive, and that's a natural place to be, just ask. Just ask. We know for a fact that asking about suicide does not increase the likelihood that a person will take their own life. That's one of those myths that so cruelly inhabit the world of mental illness. So if you're
Yeah, and
unsure,
I
ask.
just want to say at this point, whoever James' doctor was that took the time to ask those questions deserves a medal.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
And we're so thankful he was on top of it.
Yeah, I'm so thankful too. Val, I want to let you guys know I'm also a board member now of NAMI Seattle.
That's
and
what I heard. Yeah.
work
Good
with
for you. Good for
yeah.
you.
With several of the mental health agencies around the state, with NAVOS, with QPR down in Olympia. I'm trying to get on the board with NAMI Washington now. I just love the work that NAMI does and what they're all about. So that's going to be my continued involvement. I call it my next chapter of my life. For the next 20, 30 years is what I want to be doing.
Good for you. Yeah. So now the question is, how do you ask? And Patrick, we got some scenarios here. You want to cover these?
Sure. Thank you, Val. This is a little bit poignant here. My daughter's name happens to be Megan, and she's pretty healthy in terms of her mental illness. She does have some anxiety, and because of my own experience and sharing that with my daughter, we've talked about that, and she's in a pretty good place. And so anyway, the scenario, as you can see there, is that your daughter Megan has become rather anxious lately. She worries about the smallest things and had a panic attack at school a couple of weeks ago. She doesn't hang out with her friends much on weekends anymore, and isn't excited about her upcoming band concert like she normally would be. So how would you empathize? What might you say to Megan?
Yeah, I'm going to stop the share and let people maybe write some things in the chat about this.
While you're doing that,
How would you respond? How would you ask that question of Megan? And James, you had your hand up there. Were you going to ask a question?
No, I was just going to let you know about my involvement with NAMI Seattle.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Somebody might want to respond verbally, Val. Anybody out there?
Yeah.
There we go. We have Val. Beth has her hand up.
You have to unmute yourself, though.
Yeah, hi, I'm Beth Myers. I'm the MAC coordinator at Jefferson Healthcare. I'm also in recovery from many things, including depression, and I appreciated everything that has been shared today. I was impressed mostly with James's story. What really struck me was that he had specific plans that he made with other people to call me 3 days a week, and I'll call you these days a week. So that's that's a SMART goal, right? It's tangible, it's real. And so I was thinking in terms of Megan, I would spend time with her. I think a lot of times people get so busy that they don't spend enough time together, and I would spend time with her and attempt to create specific plans with her. And I don't know if finding out, a lot of times we want to find out what's wrong right now, but I think with time, it would become apparent, or it would come out and she would be able to share. So that was my thought.
And how would you ask the question?
I would just say, I've noticed things have changed for you and I'm concerned. And is there anything you want to share with me? I'm ready to listen.
I want to build on something that Beth said. This is a time of great concern, obviously, for those of us who observe those behaviors. But both Beth and James, I really have heard what you've said about all this. And it's a time to be supportive and not condemning, and almost be gentle in doing that in a way where you're not backing that person up against the wall. It's not a time to grab them by the shoulders, and unless they're getting ready to jump off a bridge or something and you happen to be there, but being gentle, welcoming, and being honest. That has really touched me. I have learned from both of you this morning.
So that's really a good point. And I guess one of the other points we wanted to make was, after an empathic conversation with Megan and lots of listening, you find out that she is feeling very lonely at school. And she also tells you, I hate my life. In your mind, consider how you would ask Megan about suicide. And that is the point at which you really have to use the S word. And you can say, maybe you can say, have you thought about killing yourself? Here's an interesting thing. What they're trying to get us to do is stop using the word commit suicide, because years ago, it used to be a crime to attempt or commit suicide. That's why they call it commit, because you commit a crime. So we're trying to start using things like taking your own life and those kinds of phrases instead of saying committing suicide. So that is one of the ways that you can ask that question. And that's the really hard part. So what if the answer is yes? So this one says, Megan, sometimes when people are feeling very anxious, they're losing interest in their activities and withdrawing from friends, they are thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? So if we were in a group, in person, meeting in person, we'd all be practicing these things with each other in the group. But what I want you to do is take a look at the statements, take a look at the questions, and think about how you would phrase those questions and how you would respond and how you would be like James' doctor was and spent so much more time with him, and really got to the root of the issue, fortunately for everyone, because like James said, had he not done that, he might not be here today. So those are the important things. If the person says yes, take it seriously. Some people believe that a person would use the suicide threat just as a threat, but you need to take it seriously. You need to also acknowledge the pain that the person must be in and thank them for their honesty and courage in telling you that. It takes a lot of courage for them to come forward and actually tell you that they've been thinking about it. And then ask some follow-up questions. Have you thought about how you might do it? James told us some stories about things that, ideas that he had. I mean, there's just so many ways. And if they've already gotten to the point where they are thinking about the ways, this is serious. And do you have access to those means? So you need to be prepared for the yes answer. If you ask them if they are thinking about suicide and they say yes, you need to be prepared for that answer. And then finally, remove the danger. So here are some little statistics about the time frame it takes. The elapsed time between the decision to attempt and the actual attempt. For 24%, it's less than 5 minutes. For 48%, it's less than 20 minutes. And for 71%, it's less than an hour. So basically, if a person has made a decision to make an attempt, they have less than an hour. We have less than an hour to help prevent that. So that's an important thing for people to think about. If you get the answer yes, you can't go away and come back tomorrow and things will be better. So James, you have a question? I'm gonna close.
Yes, I wanted to add in, Val, that, you know, when I had hanging from my rafters as one of my thoughts of ending my life, I told my doctor that, and I told my mental health therapist friend that. And the doctor told me to take that rope down that's been up in my rafters for 30 years. Take it down and give it to somebody so it's no longer staring at you every day you open up the garage door. And I did. I gave it to my mental health therapist friend, and he in a big hefty black bag, and he still has it. And luckily I wasn't a gun owner. I'm still not a gun owner, and I don't have any medications, prescription medications hanging around the house or alcohol. So those weren't options. But that rope hanging there every single day talking to me. And I think I went through a phase where I became impulsive, you know, and I've never been a very impulsive kind of guy. I've always been very thoughtful, methodical, plotting, you know, but there would be a voice that comes through my head every now and then saying, go ahead and do it. Just do it.
Mhm.
Take your life. You've already planned it out. You already know how you're going to do it. Just do it. And that was the scariest part of this whole thing. Because if I would have acted, well, I would no longer be here. And I had to fight that demonic voice of that impulsiveness telling me to just do it. End your life. It's over. And I fought that for weeks and weeks and months. So I'm so glad I followed. You know, I just did a step-by-step thing. The doc said, get rid of that rope. I got rid of it. It was no longer there tempting me every day that I drove back into my garage.
And so he was right on the mark with this, because he went right to that R, remove the danger, whether it's firearms or ropes or prescription medications or whatever it happens to be. Your doctor was right on the mark. I want to hug him.
Yeah, I did. Well, he gave me a wonderful testimony for my book. You'll read about it. Dr. Matthew Noel.
Oh, great.
Wonderful, wonderful doctor.
Yeah. So this is just the slide about removing the danger, and it's a serious thing. Get the danger out of there, and you have to ask yourself: is it safe and appropriate for me to remove or restrict dangerous items? If it's a youngster, of course, you would go in there and remove all those things. It becomes a little more difficult when it's an adult, but you still need to do those things. Lock up your excess medications, remove firearms, remove guns, ropes in the garage, whatever it happens to be. And you ask yourself, well, can I really do this? But you do that. If someone were to come to your house and you realize that they're too intoxicated to drive home, you'd ask them to give you the keys to their car. And this is the same situation. So don't feel weird about removing the danger, because the alternative is not a good one. And finally, the next steps, Patrick.
Thank you, Val. And we have, and these are immediate, and there are lots of resources out there. If the person is in immediate danger, don't hesitate to call 911. Just, I have it on speed dial on my phone, and know those numbers. 911 has been a great source, a great resource for millions of people ever since I can remember when that first came into being a long, long time ago. And fortunately, the folks that will respond are often paramedics and others, and then of course the police department. And fortunately, many law enforcement officers are now being trained, and in no small part by NAMI, in what we call critical incident training. And they've learned to recognize an individual who has a mental illness and is in a dire strait in whatever fashion that is, and de-escalate that situation and respond accordingly. And that's becoming more and more the case, and that's very, very exciting. Many areas, and I think in Seattle as well, navigators have come to work for local law enforcement agencies, and they are social workers. And there are people that can help with that situation, and they appear on the scene. They sometimes ride with the sheriffs and with the deputy sheriffs and with others. But don't hesitate to call 911 and use your gut instinct, and use the observation to do that. The National Suicide Prevention Line is there. We also have a regional crisis line, and this is run by the Volunteers of America. And the number is readily there. Brian, I think I know I dropped off some cards that you can share with people who do come to the recovery center. And there's the number right there, 1-888-910-0416. 888-910-0416. And then there's also what we call a warm line, and that's when a person may not be at that point where they're actually about to take their own lives. And Val gave a time frame for that, where you can call somebody up and talk to them. And that's extremely important. And James, we kept coming back to you for a reason. I'm really taken by your reaching out to your friends, and your friends calling you, and you calling them. And here's another avenue for having a conversation with somebody about what's going on with your life. The 24-hour chat line, and those of you who are more adept with putting things in the chat than I am, I keep hitting return, and then I end up sending 5 things to a person about a one-item topic. But IamHurting.org, that's a really good resource for you to share with the people that are part of your life. So, but don't hesitate. And then if then we go on, and this does, as we know, it just doesn't stop with mitigating that particular episode of a person wanting to commit suicide. Follow up with the recommendations that are provided by the crisis line, and get the person connected to a mental health or a substance abuse treatment. Now that can be hard to do here on the peninsula. We have a community health center, Discovery Behavioral Health, and they're good at connecting people with resources. They also have a crisis line. They also have a crisis responder. Val worked in the school system for a long time, and always reminds us that while the counselors are all overworked and there are too few of them, they are an extraordinarily important source of support. And it's shocking, I'm sure to you as it is to me, about how many young people take their lives. I mentioned we moved here from Montana a few years ago, and I personally know of probably 6 or 7 young people, some in high school, who have taken their own lives. But suicide can be prevented. I think that's one of the most important things that we can tell you. Just to replay or to share again the things that we've shared with you and to emphasize them. Look for warning signs, empathize and listen, do so in a gentle sort of way. Ask about suicide. remove the danger. And James, again, great examples. And next steps, what you should do. So give some thought to this. And there's more information available at these resources in the forefront.org. You can also call NAMI, the National NAMI organization, NAMI.org. I did put it in the chat, and also there's another phone number, info@nami.org. And NAMI is a wonderful source of information. So when you have an opportunity, browse through their website. There's a lot of information there, and they, as you can see there, they have a health line. And again, for those of you that are adept at texting, you can text them as well, and it's 741-741. And Val, I think we can make this. We're going to send this a PowerPoint to James, and I would think that and Brian, it'll be on the Recovery House website. So good. Thank you, Brian, for making that happen. So you can go to Recovery Cafe. What is your website, Brian?
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, great.
Oh, great.
And we made a new banner. NAMI hosts Mental Health Awareness Week, which takes place in October. So everything's been cast awry by COVID, and mental illness has been compounded by the experience that we have had over the last year and a half. But we put up a banner last year during Mental Health Awareness Week, and we changed it. And I'm trying to remember what it says. I liked it so much I can't remember. But is Be Kind part of that, Val?
Yeah, it's be aware, be kind, but I'm not sure what the third one is, but it might be supportive. I don't know. I haven't unrolled it for a while. But so the question is, do you have any final questions or comments? I noticed the Recovery Cafe website is listed in the chat. So if you're interested in what's happening there, that is really a good community resource now.
And to all of you, we've had pretty close to 20 people. Be kind to yourselves. Always be kind and be gentle with yourselves. We're pretty tough on ourselves, especially when we're in the throes of depression or a mental illness, but do your best to be kind for yourself, to be kind to yourself.
I want to say thank you to both Valerie and Patrick for facilitating this training. Thank you to NAMI JeffCo for putting this together. And I want to say thank you to James for sharing your story. That was, I'm just so grateful for you taking the time to be here with us today. That was it really, for me, made this training what it was.
And James, we know where you're at, so expect us to be in touch.
Good. I'd love to come out to the peninsula one day and see you guys over lunch one day. So I'll do that.
Oh, that'd be great. We'd love to have you here, and we'll know you when we see you.
Great. Weather's much better. Driving weather, ferry weather, whatever. I'll make it out, and we'll just grab lunch one day.
Yeah, the highest speed limit on the
be great.
peninsula is 60 miles an hour, and then it goes down. When I cross the Hood Canal Bridge, I tend to decompress.
Okay, good. I look forward to that. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again, everybody. We're going to sign off. Stay tuned for our upcoming volunteer trainings that happen every month. Come September, we may be adjusting the time because this is the same time as our meal service. And we're going to be thinking about what in-person looks like at some point as well, following all the phase guidelines for reopening Washington State, of course. For now, we would love to have you join us, if you would, for lunch Thursdays, noon to 3, Fridays for breakfast, 10 to noon. But with that, I'll say thank you again and see you next time.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks.